Ladies and gentlemen, from the Gainsight partner team, please welcome Tim Hogue.
Does everyone remember phones in the 90s when they were connected to a physical line? When you might be on a call and your family's eavesdropping on the other end, happened with my mom a lot. And when you couldn't even send Snapchats, not even emojis. And while we have innovated since then, customer success has actually been around for a lot longer than Silicon Valley has discovered it. The telecom industry has been proactively driving adoption and fighting for renewal for many years now. Let's see how Sprint thinks about it.
Hey, I'm Paul, and I used to ask if you could hear me now with Verizon. Not anymore. I'm with Sprint now, because guess what? It's 2016, and every network is great. In fact, Sprint's reliability is now within 1% of Verizon. And Sprint saves you 50% on most Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile rates. So I switched to Sprint, and millions more have too. Can you hear that?
To hear from an industry leveraging proactive customer success for many years now, please welcome Manish Goyal, SVP of Revenue Management at Sprint, and Richelle Deveau, Managing Director at Accenture.
All right, good morning. Very excited to be here on the Friends Couch, one of my favorite 90s sitcoms. Before we get started, y'all remember the Slido that you learned about at the beginning of the morning. So take those phones out and let's bring up the slide and show everyone the instructions. So we're going to have a nice Q&A today. I'll be asking Manish some questions and then want to get some participation from you guys as we go. So let's jump in. So long before there was this thing called Pulse, and long before this term customer success meant more than the obvious, the telecommunications industry really had a pulse on customer retention. So to kick us off, Manish, talk about how the telecommunications industry thinks about customer success and why it's important to your business.
Yeah, so customer success, retention, we've been doing this for decades. It's at the center of what we do. And it's driven, if you think about it, other than doing the right thing for the customer, by the economics of the business. So if you step back, telco is primarily a fixed cost business with a lot of the network costs in there. And then if you look at acquisition costs, they're pretty high for the industry in general. The telco industry as a whole is one of the largest spenders on marketing. There's a huge handset cost that we incur, and there are huge channel costs. We are among the largest retailers in the country. So you put all of that together for the industry overall, retention, customer success is critical to the future of the industry. What's happened, and you saw this a bit in the ad that was shown, is in the US, it is a pretty saturated market. And so what's happened is it's actually become even more important because there aren't that many new subscribers entering the market. There is still some, but it's slowing down. So in the past, while customer success might have been its own function, now it's much more integrated into the company's thinking, and we are empowered to not only think about onboarding and all the other stuff you would do as customer success, but truly to define who we are as a company. So that's what has changed, but it's always been core to what we do.
Great. And if I think about historically, telecommunications companies, don't always have the best engagement with their customers. If we think back, raise of hands of anybody who's had a challenging experience with their telco or their cable operator. So I'm sure none of those hands are Sprint customers. But how would you think about how customer success has evolved, over the years to put more of an emphasis?
Right, so look, the reality is telcos have had a sordid past. So I'm lucky I could not see too many of the hands. I'm blinded, but the reality is it's been a pretty sordid past with what the industry has done. I think what's different and exciting now is that is changing and changing pretty quickly. So just to give you a couple of examples from Sprint, and one of the disruptors is, we found that one of the biggest pain points for customers was around all the data fees that were there. And so we looked at that, we said, look, this is driving customers nuts, and we were one of the first to introduce an unlimited data plan, which has now been copied by others, but that was pretty critical to say, look, that's a key pain point. Another example of a pain point is we have this vast network of stores, and what customers were telling us loud and clear was that we want better digital self-service capabilities. So we went back to our teams, and what you'll see with Sprint now is the digital capabilities and self-serve in terms of notifications is much, much better, and I would say industry leading. So again, I think what's different is, yes, the industry as a whole was not really focused on it. It's become far more critical, and what's exciting to me in my role is that customer success is now at the core, whether it's the value prop with unlimited, whether it's how we serve customers with digital. We truly feel empowered to make changes across our entire business.
So the topic of our discussion today is customer success for literally millions of subscribers. So let's pivot and talk about scale. When you think about 60 million customers at Sprint, how do you manage a customer success organization to cover 60 million customers?
That's a great question. So in my mind, there are 2 or 3 things, and let me maybe go through each of those. The first one, managing 60 million customers is the double-edged sword, because the problem is you start looking at data versus being close to the customer. So the first thing we do as an executive team, and our CEO, Marcelo, has been hell-bent on this, is as an executive team, every one of us has to work in our stores, our channels, every month. So I was here yesterday night. I spent 2 hours working in our store in San Francisco, and I had to actually be the sales rep, do the entire transaction, and that gave me a couple of ideas on what I should be doing differently. So the number one thing we try and do is, with these many customers, everyone on the executive team has to be close to the customer, has to live the experience ourselves. So that's what I would say is number one. The second thing that we do with the data is we really try and de-average. So at any given time, we are literally tracking hundreds and thousands of segments. So to give you an example, in our business, whether you're a prime customer or a subprime customer, which channel did you come on in, which rate plan did you come on in, which device do you have, each of these things really drive the economics of what the customer lifetime value is. So what we spend a lot of time doing is, for the 60 million, 50 million customers that we have, really de-averaging it, really calculating the customer lifetime value for every one of these. There are clearly assumptions we need to make, and then really tracking each of these cohorts. The third thing that we do then after de-averaging is then to say, okay, how do I personalize your experience? Whether it's in the offer you get, whether it's in the treatment you get when you call me, but that's the second part of saying, now that I've figured out what the different cohorts are, how do I actually personalize the experience? So in my mind, those are 2 or 3 things. Number one, starting with being close to the customer, and actually being at the front lines. Number 2, de-averaging, and third, actually personalizing the experience.
Awesome. So a few follow-up questions for you then on that. On the customer lifetime value, CLV can be a pretty complex metric to track. So how have you refined and evolved the way that you track CLV over time?
Yeah, so we've been working on this for, I would say, decades now, and even now, every day we look at it and we come up with refinements. So to me, the critical factor is not that the variables themselves are correct, but that we have good assumptions and then we refine those over time. So to give you a couple of examples, right? In the past, network costs are big for us. In the past, we might have had averages around network costs. Now we actually use actual usage data. Care costs are big for us. In the past, we might have had averages of care costs. Now down to an individual subscriber, I can tag it back down. What this does is a couple of things. One is clearly it helps me understand the cohort better. It helps me improve the experience. It also helps me on the cost side, because now I can go in and say, look, this group of customers who have this type of rate plan are calling me too frequently. What's going on? So from an end customer perspective, from a cost perspective, just having the sheer discipline of saying, I've de-averaged it, how is the CLV going, and what can I afford and what can I not is really critical. And it's something which we live and breathe on a daily basis.
The third thing you mentioned in talking about scale was around personalization. And when I think about those two words, they don't seem synonymous to me at face value. So maybe you can talk about how you are really launching personalization at Sprint and how others might be able to do that at scale.
Sure. So as it comes to personalization, the very first thing for us was to truly understand my interactions across all touch points. So we've invested a bunch of time and effort in just building the plumbing which says, no matter which channel you interact with me in, whether it's on the web, whether it's in stores, whether it's on your app, I now have a full journey of what your experience was like. So that has been step number one, and we've put in a bunch of energy on that. What we've then done is we've said, okay, now that I know this, how do I then truly personalize and tailor your experience? So for example, if there's a new phone launching, so with the iPhone launch or the Galaxy launch, I will then personalize everything from the creative you get. So I can say you are a Galaxy customer, you're a millennial, you were on a Galaxy GS6 going to a GS8 versus a GS5 going to a GS8, but truly personalizing the creative to begin with, because I know the click-through rates, et cetera, will be different. Next, then going down to the offer itself, and then finally when you come into the store. So it is, the other term you'll hear a lot of the telcos talking about is simplification. So simplification and personalization, and again, to your point, could be completely orthogonal to each other. But at least at Sprint, we are spending a bunch of time to automate this and to truly understand this across the different channels.
So clearly a data-driven business. Let's take that concept of data and talk about the metrics that you track at Sprint. So when I think about metrics within the telecommunications industry, I'll think about ARPU, CAC, subscriber growth, net retention rate. A lot of these metrics are foreign to most other industries outside of wireless and cable. What can you offer to the group here today about the metrics that you track within telecommunications that could help others as they look to grow their recurring revenue base?
Yes, I would think, so I've worked a bunch in SaaS previously as well. So I think from a sheer metrics perspective, we think of it in terms of get, grow, keep. So getting new customers, growing the revenue, what are the migrations up and down, and then keeping subs. And within each of these, it's a pretty standard P times Q model. So revenue times volume, right? Rate times volume. So I'm not sure there's that much different there. I think what's different is, if any of you have been paying attention to any of the ads, the industry has become very, very promotion driven. And in a recurring revenue business, we have to really think hard about what are the promotions and what are the economics of that. So again, to give you one example, in B2B, renewals are a big thing. In the wireless business, every time a new phone is introduced, getting somebody to upgrade is a way of showing that you're recommitting to me. Now, somebody might come up with an idea and says, look, for Thanksgiving, let's, in a hypothetical situation, let me give $100 off on renewals of phones. Now, that's a good idea on the surface because you could come in and say, it's just $100. The problem is we already have a base organic load of customers who are coming in anyway. So if I went from 8,000 customers upgrading to 10,000 customers upgrading, the incremental $100 of cost is not just on the 2,000, it's on the 10,000. So my incremental cost is truly $500 per customer, not $100. So again, on a small scale, it wouldn't matter, but when you're doing it with so many subscribers, you've got to be very careful about it. So again, there's nothing different in the metrics, and I'm sure each of you is tracking some version of this. It's just for us, in the current environment, we have to be pretty thoughtful about how do we think about promotions and the true cost of those promotions and what's truly incremental versus stuff we would have gotten otherwise.
Okay. And I've got one more, so if you guys have questions to submit in the Slido, you can do that now. I think a question on a lot of companies' minds that are looking to get to scale with their customer success program is team and organization. So with 60 million customers and an exponential number of customer touch points, how are you structuring your team, your CSM team, to account for that? And I assume it's not by having 30,000 CSMs, right? So what does that look like? And then maybe if you can talk a little bit about B2B versus B2C.
Sure. So we've got 3 or 4 segments. You've got a prepaid business, a postpaid business, and then you've got SMB and enterprise. So each of these segments we treat differently. What's different from what a lot of you, I think, see in B2B is we have a vast network of stores. We've got a vast network of call centers. So there are, on average, even without proactively reaching out to people, I have a ton of interactions that I can just harvest. And so the way we've thought of it is we first said, well, whenever you're interacting with me, how do I make sure I'm pushing you the right offer or the right thing? And so that's where understanding behavior across channels is very important. And then we've invested a ton in analytics as well to basically say, who are the customers? If for some reason, your phone is delayed or you had a dropped call, who are the customers I should proactively be reaching out to? But to your point, we don't do the proactive outreach to all of the customers, especially because we do have a base load of customers coming to us as well. In terms of how our teams are organized, no surprises, there's a group which basically does what I'll call business intelligence, which truly helps me understand what's going on in my base, who ported out, who left me, who's coming in. So there's a bunch of work we put in that. That's like the central nervous system. The second group we then have is a pretty strong analytic groups, which has built what I think are pretty sophisticated churn models, propensity models. So you've got BI, you've got analytics. The third group that we then have is a group which really focuses on channel execution. That's big for us because anything we do, we are then rolling it out across over a 10,000 strong frontline. And so how do I ensure that the frontline is motivated? How do I ensure it's easy for the frontline? How do I ensure the user interface is simple? So that's the third part of it. And finally, you've got a creative group, which does a lot of the personalization, and then we have a measurement group because they are the ones who keep us in check and make sure that we're actually delivering what we do. So those would be the 4 or 5 broad themes that we have. And then again, within the channels, you have the CSMs, you have the outbound callers, you have a lot of those folks. But that's how we've organized the business.
Very good. All right, let's open it up to the group. So if you've submitted your questions on Slido, see what have we got here. So what technology, if I look at number 2 in the list, what technology are you leveraging for retention today that you hadn't used 5 years ago?
So I think there are a couple of different pieces of technology. One is on the analytics front. So everything from the latest algorithms to using new and different sources of data. So that's one thing that's clearly different. And the second thing we made a bunch of investment in is on the understanding across touch points. Previously, our view was much more siloed. So I could tell if you called a call center, I could tell if you had a poor network experience. Now I can actually link all of those together. So this piece around touch points and then the analytics would be the 2 pieces of technology which I think are truly different today.
All right. Let's look at maybe that third one in the list. Do you actually have customer success managers, or is customer success simply a mission for Sprint?
So we don't have people with that specific job title. We do have people who perform certain roles which are similar to that, but we don't really have people who we'll call a customer success manager per se, even in SMB where it would be the most prevalent. But it's a very similar, it's more of an expanded job title. And the reason again is with the sheer number of customers we have, we cannot just set up these silos. And so what we are trying to drive is the sense that everybody, it's part of the job of everybody in the company.
And what does that job title look like, or the job description look like then?
It depends. So in consumer, for example, I have a bunch of folks who will reach out with what we call triggers. So you had a poor network experience, I'll reach out to you. Right, so it's not a customer success manager per se, but in consumer, it's somebody who's actually proactively reaching out to you. On the SMB side, it's a very similar thing as a customer success manager. We just call them a different name. But on the SMB side, it's pretty similar.
Okay. All right, I think we got time for one more. Let's do the one at the top. Are there any trends you've seen in the top performers in your customer success team, and what makes them so successful?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. I think to me, the biggest thing I've seen is the difference is, in our world, it's too easy to get lost in the data, because you've got tons and tons of data and you can cut it 50 different ways, and depending on what you're trying to prove, you can always prove that fact. So for me, the folks who really do well are the people who keep their ear to the ground, who are talking to the customer, who will basically challenge it and say, your data might be saying X, I think Y. And so surprising for me, look, I've got a very strong quantitative background. The people I think I always make the time for are the folks who will say, yeah, that's what your data says, but here's what intuition tells me. And the folks who are doing that, to me, are truly the ones who excel. And so again, I'm sure as you go through the presentation, I'm sure you'll see a lot of the new and greatest things, but at the end of the day, keeping it simple, trying to understand what the customer is saying, I think is truly what makes a difference.
Very good. Well, I believe everybody in the audience learned a lot about getting to scale through Sprint. So Manish Goyal, thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure.